to the Finance and Tech Podcast. I'm your host and Chief Finance Techie, Simon Ritchie. This is the show where we dive into all things technology for finance teams. I interview other finance techies, finance leaders, and industry legends who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build and grow a career in finance. In this podcast, we're joined by Brent Dykes. Brent is the author of an amazing book called Effective Data Storytelling. He actually started out his career in marketing. Marketeers have lots of data at their fingertips, so he got pulled into the world of data analytics. For the last 2 decades, he's worked with prominent vendors such as Omniture, Adobe, and Domo. He's consulted with industry leaders like IKEA, Nike, Microsoft, Sony. He is currently the founder of his own data storytelling consultancy, Analytics Hero. He regularly writes for Forbes, is a speaker at major industry conferences like Web Summit, and has even received industry awards in the space. In this episode, we dive into data storytelling for finance teams. What is data storytelling and when is it relevant? We talk about the difference between reporting and data storytelling and how there is a place for both. We also talk about what Brent calls the data analytics marathon and why he believes that most teams give up before the end of the race, quitting without collecting their medal. We discuss the right tech stack to get started and some exciting new technologies that are coming along. Also, why Brent thinks that AI is a good co-pilot for data storytelling, but he would hold back on putting on autopilot right now. Brent is an amazing guest and he shares his insights freely, and it's fantastic. It's real gold for finance teams. I hope you enjoy. So thanks so much, Brent, for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Awesome. So maybe could you just give us a quick overview on your journey and your background so far?
Yeah, so I was originally studying I was studying business administration. I was probably going down the path to going into accounting, but I also had this passion for marketing, and so I had to make a decision. Do I go with which one do I choose? And I decided, you know what, I'm going to go with marketing, which at the time there really wasn't a lot of data in marketing, or if you went into market research, as one professor said, it's the way to make the least amount of money in marketing. So I went into marketing and then did my MBA, and then that's what got me into analytics. And so I worked for a company called Omniture, which is kind of, if you're familiar with Google Analytics, it's basically an enterprise version of Google Analytics at the time, called Omniture Site Catalyst. And then we were acquired by Adobe. And so that really got me into the data world. I was working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies as a analytics consultant, business consultant, kind of working on their measurement strategies and doing analysis and reporting and all those good things. So that's what really got me into the world of data analytics. And then I went on to work for, after 12 years at Omniture / Adobe, I was then working at Domo. So I got into the BI space for 4 years, and then I worked for an agency after Domo for about a year and a bit. And then for the last 2+ years, I've been doing my own kind of consulting around data storytelling.
Yeah. Yes. Fantastic. And you wrote a book. I've got it here.
Yeah.
I've been going through it. I'm loving it. Called Effective Data Storytelling. What led to the book? I'd love to know that.
Yeah. So when I was at Adobe, I really saw like a need to kind of communicate insights and different observations to audiences more effectively. And I think myself and other consultants kind of struggled with this. I saw clients struggling in this area, and it was something that I really got passionate about. So this is back in 2013 or so. And so then I pitched to the Adobe Summit conference. So we'd have this annual conference inviting in all of our customers. And I said, I'd really like to do a breakout session on data storytelling. And so pitched the concept. They said, sure, we'll do it. And ended up being one of the top most popular sessions at the conference. And so, that's when I knew I was onto something. And so then I I did another follow-up the next year, and then I was going to do a third follow-up the third year before I actually joined a different company at that point. But every year I would do a session on this, and then I started presenting on it at other conferences, and I'd have people come up to me and say, "Hey, I loved your content. Do you have a book, or is there a book you'd recommend?" And so, I realized, okay, I need to write about this. This is something I need to do. And then, yeah, that's kind of what got me down this path of writing a book.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I applaud you because that is a lot of work, and you put a lot of energy into this. So yeah, I'm loving it. Just before we get into the topic for today and really dive into data storytelling, do you have one of my favorite questions to ask is, do you have a power pose memory? Basically, a memorable moment or a story, something that you're particularly proud of, where you wanted to stand up and do a power pose.
I'm not really that kind of like that's kind of like not really my personality, but one memory that I have is when it was just before I published my book.
Okay.
I was working for a company, and they brought me out to Web Summit. So if you're probably in EU, Web Summit, it's a pretty big conference. It was in Portugal. And so I was doing a breakout session at Web Summit. So it was like a 45-minute session on data storytelling. And the day before, or the day of, when I was getting ready to go there was a huge lineup to go in. Like there was more people than what could fit in this room. And so one of the guys from our team for the company I was working for, took this video where he started at the start of the line and just followed it as it kind of like, it's just this long queue that just went on and on and on and on forever. There's no way that everybody was getting in the room. But it was, it felt really good that, they sent it back to the corporate office and said, "Hey, Brent's session is, super popular." And, and so that was just a proud moment. And that was even before I published my book. So just to go again, to know that, this was a topic that people cared about and interested in, and that, it was something that, that made me proud that moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. Standing room only at an event at Web Summit. That's awesome. Congrats. That's cool. So let's jump into data storytelling a bit. So I absolutely love the book. I've been going through it. I love how you kind of help sort of structure. And what I thought was relevant for finance people, which is the audience of this podcast, is really, and for my education, I did accounting and finance degree. I'm chartered management accountant. No one really ever taught me, or I don't remember being taught how to tell a story around data. And they teach you how to add up numbers and which numbers to add up and how to get your accounts to balance and all that stuff, but nothing about data. So what I loved in the book is it's all about how to create that narrative with data. You talk about 3 pillars of storytelling. The data is the foundation, the narrative. You even talk about story arcs and kind of up with your suggestion of the data storytelling arc, which I love. Yeah. And then you jump into visuals as well, and the kind of pros and cons, good and bad visuals. What's misleading, what's the right thing to use, when to use certain types of visuals. So really, really enjoying it. What, in your words, would you say finance people should think about when it comes to data storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the most important things is to recognize when it's an opportunity to tell a data story. When do you need to tell a data story? You don't always need to tell data stories. That might be surprising to some people. You hear from a guy who's evangelizing the power of data storytelling, to expect him to say, well, every situation you should be telling data stories. And I would say, no, that's not the case. Sometimes you're just passing along information. There may not be a story. There's just, here's an answer. You wanted to know this about the company, or this about this particular part of the business, and here's the answer, 42. Yeah. That's it. No, nothing surprising, nothing shocking, nothing earth-shattering. Just that's the number, 42. That's the answer. And so that's a part of it. So it's really, I in my book I talk about the story zone, And so there's really, and I've kind of updated it recently. So in the book, it's a little bit different, but still very pretty close to what I say now. So if you think about a matrix, right? So on one axis, you have the value of the information you're sharing, the value of the insight to the business. So if it's a high value insight or medium to high value, okay, that's the first criteria, that there's something of value here. It's important to the company. It's important that they understand its significance. So that's the first thing. And then the other criteria I would summarize now that it's basically the level of resistance that you have to that insight. Mm-hmm. And so on that case, if it's high resistance, and it could be high resistance for different reasons, it could be because people don't want to change. We've been doing something a certain way for a long time, and now you're telling us to completely change our supply chain or completely change our training policy or whatever it is that we've identified that's the insight. Mm-hmm. It could be resistance because it's complicated. It could be resistance because it's unpleasant. Nobody likes bad news. Nobody really likes, hearing that, we're going to have to let go of some people or different things like that. So whenever there's going to be resistance to either understanding or accepting the information, those are those moments when we have to tell a data story because there's too much riding on it, and we know that there's going to be some resistance. Now, in other cases, many other data communications, there's no resistance. Kind of like that earlier version. The answer is 42. Yeah. Okay, great. There's nothing attached to that. I just need to know that answer so we can make a decision and move forward. And there's no, it's straightforward. It's not counterintuitive. There's nothing there. It's not disruptive. Yeah. So that's the key thing. I think that would be the first thing. Recognizing when and where you need to tell stories, and maybe those situations where it's not critical that you tell a story.
Yeah, amazing. So if we get into it, what would you say? What is data storytelling, and what isn't data storytelling?
Yeah, I kind of define it as it's basically a way to bring together those three things that I talked about. So data being the foundation, right? So that's the first thing. You're basing a story not just on, hey, my opinion, or I've thought of something creative. No, we're basing it on data. So there's data that's underlying the story that we're telling, and then we're combining those insights or observations with a narrative element. And that goes beyond just language or text around the data points. It goes into the actual structure of how we structure a data story, using that story arc or the storyline that threads through what could be multiple slides or sections in a report. And then the last thing being the visuals. Often now, you could argue that you don't always need to have visuals, and I would agree with that. Maybe when I was writing the book, I wasn't as aware of this, but if you look at a lot of podcasts out there, data podcasts, or even just very informational podcasts, sometimes they're telling data stories without a single visualization. Wow. And they're sharing statistics and data and weaving that in a narrative structure. But the reason why visuals are frequently important is because we're dealing with a lot of complex data. It's harder for people to kind of, you could give them one statistics and they can kind of process it. But if there's context that's needed, or you need to share multiple numbers, or just showing trends or anomalies, and really understanding the significance and how unique they are, that can be harder when you're just describing them rather than showing people, right? So a lot of times I kind of talk about how when we take that spreadsheet of numbers and columns and rows of data and we actually visualize it, that's where we can enlighten the audience, because they can actually see the patterns, they can see the trends, they can see, oh, wow, this really is an anomaly compared to everything else that's happening in the data.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just talk a little bit. In our finance world, we deal with a lot of reporting, especially on a cadence, weekly reports, monthly reports that go off to the government, etc. Right. So how would you delineate between reporting and maybe data storytelling?
Yeah, and that's actually something I'll be writing a blog post about. Probably be out by the time this podcast is released. But I look at it as one of the key differences between data storytelling and reporting. So if we start with just basic reporting, you're going to have a bunch of areas of the business that you're going to be looking at. And usually those sections of your report don't change, right? You're going to look at the same metrics, the same dimensions
Yeah.
over and over each month or each week, whatever it is. And sometimes there may be something interesting in one of those sections. Maybe everything's working as expected. There's really nothing unusual, nothing that stands out. And so the report each period is going to change. There may be different things that stand out or change. Now, a level up from that I talk about is narrative reporting. So narrative reporting, I see it as adding in some context and some interpretation on top of those reports. So if there is an anomaly, if maybe there's an interesting pattern going on in one of those sections, you call it out. You say, hey, look, our sales are going up 30%, week over week for the last 3 weeks. That's an interesting trend. Oh, you see this spike? Well, let me explain what that spike. It's really nothing, because what happened was, we launched our new product on that day. So we had a lot of, interest in everything, but really that's that to explain that spike, that's what happened, right? So we add in the context, we add in some interpretation. But the key thing, the difference between narrative reporting and data storytelling is that with data storytelling, we are focusing on a specific insight. And if you look at a report, right, our goal is to kind of report on each of those sections, regardless of what's happening. We're very comprehensive and consistent in how we're sharing the information. Whereas with a data story, we actually don't want to necessarily focus on sections where there's nothing really going on, right? We want to focus on the story and dive really deeply into what's potentially causing it and what actions we need to take. So the difference between a data story and a narrative report, let's say, is that the narrative report will still cover all of the sections, regardless. It's not going to drop a section because nothing was happening there, nothing unusual was happening. Whereas with a data story, why would we talk about sections or areas of the business that aren't really core to that particular story, right? We're going to tell that, we're going to share that insight, we're going to dive into it deeply, we're going to help get from just the what to the why.
Yeah.
And so we're removing content that's not aligned with that story. And the structure of the data story is the structure of a story arc, right? So we're taking them, we're sharing it as a story, not as a report. A report, is just it's got its hierarchy or its structure around those sections. And so that's the difference that there's, and I think that's what could happen is you could have the start of a story, right? You could see make some observation in the data and say, oh, wow, like our sale, let's take that example of the three periods in which the sales were increasing. Well, why are they increasing? What's going on? Like, that's kind of catching us off guard. Like, is there something causing that? If we better understood what was causing that increase in sales, maybe we could double down on it and really, blow it up. So a data story would say, if we analyzed it, we found, oh, wow, there's this new feature that we introduced a while ago into our product, and new customers, prospects are just loving it. And we didn't even realize that to us, it wasn't even a big deal. We're not promoting it in our marketing materials. We're not really highlighting it to our existing customers, and so that could be an opportunity. And we tell a story about that new feature and what do we do about it? Hey, let's invest more engineering time in really exploring that feature, because it was just kind of like a throw-in feature, and it's really resonating with prospects. In our marketing materials, let's make some changes. Let's really promote that feature going forward, instead of prospects who already knew about it. Let's tell all of our prospects about the feature and how great it is. But that's kind of the difference. And there is a linkage between reporting and storytelling. It's just they serve very different functions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense now, the way you describe that, because you need both. You need reports that will help you surface observations that may not be, in view on your top level dashboard. So you kind of you you look through them and you catch key observations. I like your distinction between observations and insights as well, where
Yeah,
like I can observe something and then I might ask somebody to dive really deep in and then come
right.
back and report on it, or give me a data story, or tell me what's going
That's something that I've really even started in the book, but ever since the book, I've really harped on the importance of distinguishing between observations and insights, because I think I'm more on the analytics side, the data world. I'm sure in finance, you guys probably use the word insight very loosely as well,
on.
and that's a problem, because what do? We're diluting the power of that word when we
Right.
call an observation an insight. And I see that repeatedly happen at different companies that I interact with. That can cause some confusion around what really are insights. And when I was writing my book, I had some reviewers. So this before the book was published, I had some book reviewers who were giving me feedback on the different chapters, and a couple of them said, "Hey, you mentioned the word insights a lot in your book, but you haven't really defined what an insight is, and you probably should do that." And I was like, "Oh yeah, no problem. I'll just put it in a quick definition in the first chapter, call it good."
Quick,
And then as
quick.
I started, yeah, then as I started thinking about it, I was like, "Oh, I use the word a lot, but have I really given thought to what it means? What is an insight?"
Uh-huh.
And then I was struggling with the definition, and then I looked at the dictionary definitions, and I was like, "Oh, they're just not quite right." And then somebody recommended to me a definition that was done by Gary Klein, who's a psychologist and author, and he basically defined it as it's an unexpected shift in the way we understand things. And for me, that was so concise, so to the point, and it really helped me to kind of think, yeah, that's what an insight is. It's like when we have an existing understanding or viewpoint or assumption about how our customers interact with us, or how our this process works, or this program performed, and then all of a sudden we get data that kind of contradicts our perception.
Yeah.
And that's really what an insight is. Like, oh my gosh, it's kind of go back to that example I shared earlier. It's like, oh my gosh, we had no idea that this feature would be so impactful to our prospects and customers. And then now we're like going through all the changes that need to happen to introduce that, and to embrace that
Mm.
insight. And insights can be disruptive,
Yeah.
but they can also be highly valuable, because if you realize, like, oh, I've been, let's say I've been studying this way for tests, and I get B's every time, and then all of a sudden we find, we get an A on one test, and we it's because we changed the style, the approach that we had to studying.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh my gosh, like this could be huge. I could apply this to all of my classes.
Yeah.
And now, maybe I'm going up to, getting A's in all of my classes now. That's disruptive. That's powerful,
Yeah.
and that's an insight.
Yeah. Amazing. In finance and when we're doing reporting, we're often dealing with summarized data that's gone
Mm-hmm.
into the accounting system. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was really about like how would you what information do you need, and how do you really help to tell a story around that, and how would you go about diving right down into like a P&L, some sort of high level variance, and then where would you go from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably the most important thing is to put context around those numbers. Why are we seeing these changes? What's contributing to what we're seeing in the different numbers that we're seeing in the P&L? And so that's where mastering the ability to use context is really important, I think, for finance people, or for anybody really.
Yeah.
So when we're seeing these numbers, what do they compare to? Are we comparing them to other areas of the business? Maybe we find that there's a region of the business that's outperforming all the other regions, and so that we put that number in perspective. We say, and basically we could look at it, let's compare it to other regions,
Yeah.
or we could start to get into historical. How's that region typically performed?
Mm,
Year over year. If we look at that same time period last year, oh wow, it's a huge change. And then we start to dig into those. Oh, look, we have a new leader. There was a new leader introduced, and she's just rocked it. She's just implemented a bunch of new policies and changes and hiring and all those things. And wow, we can see the impact that she's had on that region as a regional leader. Other things, we can take the numbers, we can scale them up or down. We can say, well, let's look at this performance. If this region continues to perform as it's performing over the next 4 quarters, we can expect to see growth in this region by X percent. Again, we're kind of forecasting here, we're kind of predicting. There's also informational context. So the informational context, I've already kind of given it, that we have this new leader, and she's leading the change. But then we can dig deeper into what are those programs and policies and decisions that she's making that we can then apply to other regions and maybe help those other regions perform like her region is performing. There's lots of different ways in which the context can be brought in, and I think that's that's powerful when you can go beyond just the typical reports and those high level summarized metrics and dig into what's really going on and why they're occurring. That's where you become a strategic advisor, not just a data provider.
Yeah, amazing. So let's jump in. We were chatting about this, and I was really interested in this concept of like the data analytics marathon, and I thought it was great because when I was building reports, shipping out reports to leaders around the business, I would spend so much time. They would normally ask me like, how long is it going to take? And I'd tell my boss, okay, I need a bit of time to do this thing. It would always take a lot longer than that. Maybe it's just my terrible my terrible sizing. I'm always over optimistic. Take way longer, and then by the time
the data is always going to be clean, right? When you first get into it, the data. Oh, you're making the assumption data is clean.
Yeah,
and then you get into it, and you're like, oh my gosh, not so clean.
Yeah, absolutely. So by the time I'm done, like it's been I've completely blown my window to actually write anything down, and so I end up just sending a boring table of data, and I never really felt like I was doing as much as I could. So I'd love to know what you're thinking, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so I wrote an article just for the people on the podcast called the Analytics Marathon. So it's a Forbes article, and it's been really popular. I think it's really resonated with a lot of people. And one of the things that I try and point out through that article is that I think a lot of companies are not finishing the analytics marathon, and they really don't have a vision for really completing the race. And I view, if you finish the race, like let's just look at it. My wife actually just competed in a marathon over the weekend. And what did she get from winning her race? I mean, obviously there's the intrinsic kind of like, you feel good about yourself and everything, but she gets a medal, right? Everybody who finishes the finish line gets a medal. If you don't cross the finish line, you don't get a medal.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how long you trained, or if you ran 26 miles and you just didn't do the last 0.2 miles, you don't get a medal. I'm sorry. And I feel like what's happening is I think a lot of the companies are investing a lot of time and effort to collect data, to prepare data so that it's usable in reports and dashboards. They build those dashboards, they visualize the information, and then there's a drop off. In the drop off that I see, the first point where I see very few companies really investing in is doing actual analysis. So they kind of say, hey, here's the report, or here's the dashboard. We're good. What's the next prize? So it's like you're getting like a lot of the way through the marathon, but then you say, okay, we're done, and you say, let's go start running another marathon. It's like, but you didn't get the medal. You didn't. What? And so the first thing is to analyze the data, to find insights, then to be able to, and then the data communication or the data storytelling comes in, because we want to then communicate those insights in a persuasive and engaging way so that decision makers, oh, wow, we really need to improve this area. There's an opportunity over here. And then actually act on those insights, and only when we act on those insights and actually drive value from them, that's when we get the medal. That's when we get the value and the medal from all of this analytics work that we're doing, or this reporting or finance work that we're doing. Unless we're actually acting on that information, we're not going to be driving real value from all of these efforts that proceed, right? And so, obviously, there's a lot of work goes into collecting the data, making sure that it's usable, preparing it and visualizing it. That's all important work. but that's not the end of the race. And that's the point that I try to get across to people. If you're just producing dashboards and reports, you're leaving, it's the last mile, as I talked about in the article. It's, you're not finishing that last mile, and that's got to happen.
Yeah, they're leaving the race without their medal.
Right.
Who would do that? Yeah.
Right.
So let's chat. I love to talk about technology in this podcast. So let's just talk a little bit. I'd love to get your thoughts on maybe not specific vendors, but what sort of technology should finance teams, should people be thinking about when it comes to data storytelling? What key technology should they have?
Yeah, I mean, to get started with data storytelling today, all you need is really basic tools. You just need whatever your presentation software is and a basic, tool like Excel. Like, we don't even have to make this much more complicated than Excel. So if you're analyzing in Excel, you have data in Excel, and then how do we present that? Typically I would see that being in a presentation. So really, you only need the ubiquitous Microsoft tools. But beyond that, that's the low barrier there. You can go beyond that. There's obviously much more complicated analysis tools. You can do statistical analysis packages. You've got, and again, it depends on what type of data you're analyzing. But there's lots of packages out there, lots of tools to visualize the data in different ways. But really, I feel like the key thing is just doing whatever helps you to do analysis, and then whatever helps you to communicate that your findings of your analysis. And you really don't need complex tools beyond just the basics that you get out of most companies have the basics to get started.
Yeah, awesome, nice. And then let's jump forward. So let's say that you're a data analyst. You've been doing it for a while. You've got some great tools. I'd love to know your thoughts on what is new right now that you find quite interesting, that you think is something that an expert should grab hold of to make them more efficient, or is there anything topical right now in your world?
I mean, this is probably for every tool is just AI, right? So the ability to introduce AI into this process. Now, some people kind of say, oh, hey, we can just have the machines or the algorithms tell us stories. And there's many vendors out there that will tell you that, oh yeah, our tool has automated data storytelling. And now the key problem here that I see is we have to make sure that our stories are meaningful to our audience. It's not just about taking, sharing, hey, this went up 3%, and this went up, 15%, and this went down 10%.
Up, this region down,
that's like, okay, well, that's great, but is there a story behind it? If there's no story behind it, then who cares? And you have to be careful. Like, you can automate data storytelling, and then you can start churning out all of these. Really, they're just observations. They're really not insights. And then that's a problem, because all of a sudden people are going to be bombarded with, like, here's another, and I see this all the time where an observation is being labeled as an insight. I'm getting 100 insights a week, but none of them are useful to me. None of them tell me what to do. None of them are actionable. None of them are meaningful. I don't even care about half of them, because they're not related to my goals or the objectives I'm trying to solve. And so that's the danger, that we start automating storytelling. And then the stories are worthless to the people that we share them with. So that's where I like the human intervention. Because we understand the audience, what's important to their goals, their priorities, and those priorities and goals shift. They could shift month to month, week, period to period, based on what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening at the company. And then being able to then bring in that context that sometimes doesn't live in the tools that the automations or the algorithms are running against. So knowing the context, like, oh yeah, that's when this competitor announced this new product. We don't have that data in our data systems. We can't, or this is an anomaly in the data, but it was because we were double counting. It was an error and
Yeah.
we can't back that out of our systems now. And now we've got, the computer or the algorithms are comparing those numbers against a bad set of data. So anyway, so we as human beings can dive in. Now that doesn't mean that I'm anti artificial intelligence. I see lots of ways. I'm more on the augmentation side of it, that using that technology, and I'm really excited about how it can augment my ability to find anomalies, to kind of streamline maybe some of the messaging and tightening up how I talk about things. I think there's lots of ways in which AI can complement what we're doing as storytellers. I just think I'm not ready to hand over the keys to machines to do the storytelling, because I'm worried about how they may dilute or confuse people, and then all of a sudden now they no longer trust me or my team to tell actual stories.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so AI as the co-pilot, not
Right.
autopilot. Yeah,
Right. Exactly.
yeah, I like it. And then I'm really passionate about planning and forecasting and budgeting, and some of the conversations that go on there are challenging. There's lots of data. It's a lot about future, and you've got leaders in there who have their thoughts around specific assumptions that they might have, etc. How do you think data storytelling is relevant in the context of planning, budgeting? What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, think about the resistant, like you talked about that, that leaders have certain opinions about what's going to happen or how things are going to play out.
Yeah.
And then maybe you're modeling, your forecasts and predictions actually don't support that opinion.
Yeah.
So now you have that, you're in the story zone,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the executive is going to be resistant to that new information because they have opinion, they have experience, they have a gut instinct that's telling them the opposite. And here you are, you have the data, you have the evidence to show them that's not correct. Now, obviously, different audiences are going to have, some are going to be more closed-minded, some are going to be more open-minded. If you bring the evidence and you communicate it in an effective way. There's studies out there that show that storytelling can be one of the few ways in which we can actually break down those barriers and open up people's minds to potentially considering an alternative perspective. And so that's a key way. So as we're doing our planning, we're doing our forecasting, basically have a bunch of what if scenarios, and being able to kind of like tell the story behind those and support, what the potential future could look like, supported by data. I think that is a great way to go. And so I think, storytelling definitely can play into the forecasting and planning kind of world.
Fantastic. Nice. Awesome. I suppose to maybe just jump into a couple of like your personal questions, personal observations, personal lessons. So in writing the book, you spent a long time writing down your thoughts, and I'm sure that you've been out there and not everybody's agreed with them. Or how throughout your career, how have you dealt with sometimes failures or setbacks that come? How do you kind of pick yourself up? Have you got an approach?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's something that I could think about. I mean, one of the things that sometimes people don't fully understand something, and so I've worked in consulting a lot, and so consulting has taught me some good lessons, in the sense that you can't give up. Like, you may phrase a question a certain way with a client, right? And you're trying to get information from the clarity around the project or aspect of the project, and they don't answer the question the right way. And I think what consulting taught me is, okay, well, it's kind of like, you kind of come in with an approach, and then you back it up and you say, well, let's come in from a different approach, and keep trying. I know that I need this information. And, the first one or two attempts at getting that information hasn't worked. Either they just didn't click, in their minds what I was looking for. And so I think that resilience, that ability to just say, you know what, okay, that didn't work. I'm going to back up. I'm going to try it from a different perspective, or phrase the question slightly differently, and keep trying, because I know I need that information to complete the project, or to do it the right way. And unless they're giving me what I need, I can't give them full value. So I think that's the resiliency of a consultant to kind of keep trying.
Yeah.
Don't give up and say, oh, I guess they don't know, or
Yeah.
I guess we'll just have to guess at that. No, I think there's usually a way, and I've learned that language is a funny thing, and how you and I interpret a question. We might feel like, oh, that question is pretty clear,
Yeah.
but then we don't understand the context in that person's mind. We don't understand what's going on, or how maybe a particular word means something different to them than it does to us. And
Yeah.
so that's just one lesson I've learned from my consulting experience.
Yeah, that's amazing. I suppose that one of the reasons I thought I'd ask that and we'd dive into this is like as an analyst, as a finance person with the data, you feel like sometimes the insights you draw are the truth, and like so if you
Mm-hmm.
share them and you're wrong, it's like it's a setback. And so obviously you have to communicate in the right way. You have to be willing to put yourself out there, and then to say, actually, yeah, I didn't know, I was wrong. Like this is just what I thought. You know,
Yeah, and I think part of that is just realizing that sometimes we have incomplete data.
absolutely.
Sometimes we don't have the full context, right? So maybe the audience knows something they didn't share with us at the time. And so if we look back on, if we had that piece of context, yeah, then we maybe would have come to a different conclusion. Maybe we would have made different recommendations, but we didn't have that full context, or we didn't have complete data. So I
Yeah,
think, that's also taught me, that, yeah, like sometimes we're gonna come with a particular perspective, and then and the other thing too is sometimes you have to just run a test. That's another thing I recommend is let's not go for the slam dunk. That doesn't mean like even though our data is showing us that, oh, we need to make this change within the business, maybe it's like, well, let's just run a test
yeah,
first. Let's do a smaller proof of concept, something to kind of test the idea first. That's going to do one of two things. It's going to avert us having made a big mistake
yeah,
because we made a big bet and it cost us, or it's going to confirm, oh yeah, no, this works. Like we're onto something here. So now we have greater confidence going forward that yeah, this is going to work. We can make this investment and know that it's going to pan out. So if there's the opportunity to do a proof of concept, a test, test out the idea first, that I see that as a good baby step, and can prevent some of those, oh, I really missed that, or I'm sorry, I didn't see that factor coming into this.
yeah,
But with a test, we can catch those things, and maybe even it's like, oh, we hadn't factored that in. Let's change our our approach slightly. We'll take the learnings from the test or the proof of concept. There's still value there. Now we're just going to make this tweak here and there. Boom, we've got something that's going to be more viable and more successful.
fantastic. And then last part of the pod, I like to just ask a few questions, just rapid fire,
Yeah.
um, and then we'll wrap up. So, a couple of questions. If we asked your clients or family what your favorite phrase is, what do you think they would say?
If I go with my family, they'd probably say, "Don't hoe in." That's at our dinner table. Our kids will just start eating, and it's like,
Okay.
wait a second, no, wait for the family. Let's sit
Yeah.
down,
Uh-huh.
But if it's business, I would say a phrase that I really a quote that I really loved, and it's in the book.
Yeah.
And I don't feel it's as popular as it needs to be, but it's a quote from Alexander von Humboldt, and he was a German cardiographer, and he said, "Address the eye without fatiguing the mind. Address the eye without fatiguing the mind." And
Okay.
so that ties into just when you're communicating your data story using
Yeah.
visuals,
Yeah.
don't make it harder than it needs to be. Make it easy for people to mentally process what you're sharing visually. So it's just, it's effortless.
Yeah.
It helps it helps their mind to
Got
process
it.
the information, not making it harder, like, you know,
Yeah.
fatiguing to kind of go through what you're sharing.
What is your favorite chart or visual and why?
I'm going to go super boring here. I like the bar charts just because they're so useful. I find that they're just a very good, safe chart. I mean,
Yeah.
there's lots of different variations that we can modify them in different ways, but it's just a very good utilitarian kind of chart. Again, line charts and bar charts. I mean, it's hard for me to pick between those, but we're not always dealing with time series, so
Yeah.
I have to go with the bar chart.
Love it. What is something that you have on your I want to learn about this topic in the next 12 months list?
Yeah, so one of the things I want to learn about is I'm going to be launching a new course, an online course for my data storytelling. And so I'm looking at different platforms. So I want to, there's different kind of learning platforms out there like Teachable or Thinkific, different platforms. And so that's definitely a goal of mine to learn those platforms. Because I'd like to have a course that provides obviously the functionality that I need it to, but then also build a community around that course. And so that's something I'm looking at launching in 2024.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Is there anything that you are looking for help for right now, research or input that the community might reach out and help you out with?
I'm always looking for good stories. So if you have a good story about success or failure with data storytelling, reach out to me. I'd love to hear them. I write for Forbes, and obviously I won't share any confidential, company names or anything like that. But even if I can anonymously say, hey, I was talking to a finance team at a retailer, and they ran into this situation. So, anything about data culture, data storytelling, I really love those kind of real stories because those. I actually really believe in the power of storytelling, that it's not just the data stories that we tell, but just stories in general. Those, they impart meaning, they impart learnings, they can be humorous. I mean, they're very something we share, and then they can be reshared. So any kind of stories, data related stories, data storytelling related stories, data culture related stories, I love those. So keep them coming.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brent. And where can people find you? What's the best platform of choice for you?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in data storytelling, I'm regularly posting topics and posts about data storytelling, data culture, data strategy. Those are all areas that I cover, and so LinkedIn's probably the best. I would have said Twitter, but Twitter is now X, and I'm losing interest quickly in that platform. So
there we go.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Brent, thanks so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, Simon.